Right now, excuse me, an interesting man that I worked for, and we're friends. I haven't seen him for a long time, but that's the industry we're in. It doesn't matter. You just pick up and go and start again. He's written a book, which is interesting. He's been most of his life in the licensed retail trade, so he certainly knows what he's talking about. His company is PL Training. He wrote a story, the story of alcohol and society. He has an opinion without any shadow of a doubt, and he's been making it known on social media, but he's very clever and very sensible. Hello, Paul Chase.
Hello, Peter. How are you?
I'm very well indeed, and I hope that intro did you justice, because we haven't spoke for a long time, but it's not like that, is it, in our industry? You just pick up. That's the nature of it.
Well, it is. It's pretty fast moving, and you're right. That is the nature of it. That's how we roll.
Looking back at your career and how you've changed so much, let's talk about the early days first of all, before we start talking about the annihilation of nightclubs and what's going on. The early days were something else, weren't they?
Yeah, I mean, you and I first met when I was running the Chelsea Reach in New Brighton, and I guess a lot of your older listeners would remember Monday nights at the Chelsea, open on 2 floors, 3 discos. People from all over Merseyside used to go there on a Monday night, and it was open 7 nights a week. I mean, it was roaring ahead. Of course, that was under very different licensing laws to the ones we have today, and that was the first premises I ran. I've run about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 premises in total over the years. And then at the in the middle of that, I also started a training company called CPL Training, as you know, but which I retired from about 18 months ago.
Right. Paul, why did you go down that route? Did you feel, because although you are very successful, but you also can handle yourself, so you could make a good doorman as well. What made you go down that road?
Download it into the license trade?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, when I was at university, like a lot of people, I worked behind the bar, and indeed I worked on nightclub doors. The first one was called the Gauntlet Club in South Castle Street. It's no longer there. It's now the QE2 Law Courts, strangely. So you know, I kind of fell in love with nightclubs and with the late night economy when I was sort of 18, 19, 20 years of age. And then I went and did other things in my early 20s. I did some teaching. But in the course of all that, I met the very well-known club owner, Roy Adams, who you also know very well. And his family and my family decided to find a premises together, and that premises was the Chelsea Reach. And it opened in 1971, and I worked there on the door for a few years. And then in 1979, I had the opportunity to manage it, and that was my first job, managing a licensed premises. Pretty much, a baptism of fire, because it was a big place and it took some controlling. Yeah. So I guess for me, it just running nightclubs and late night bars is a kind of exciting existence, or so it seemed at the time, and it's a job for a young man or a young person, and back then I was a young person, so it had a kind of mystique attached to it. Mm.
I remember years ago going to Holland for a weekend, and I couldn't believe that people were going out at 1 o'clock in the morning to go out drinking, whereas I'd gone out at 7:30 in England. And I remember having a conversation with you about it, and I wondered what your views were, knowing that the licensing laws were going to change. Was it a good thing? Because there was an uproar about it, wasn't it, when it happened?
There was. I mean, there's a long history to licensing and to how licensing has been used to control alcohol misuse. You know, America went down the road of prohibition. We went down the road of strict licensing of licensed premises and restricted hours. And I think we got to a point in the late 90s where the cracks were beginning to show, and people didn't want to go home at 10:30, and if they wanted to drink later than that, they had to go to as older people would have called it, a pay-at-the-door disco, and drink with a bunch of kids. So they wanted to be able to go for a later drink. So the changes that were proposed, there was a white paper in 2000, I think it was, proposing a big change to licensing laws, which kind of it abolished permitted hours set nationally by Parliament and replaced it with a system that we have now, the 2003 Licensing Act, which kicked in at the end of November 2005. And it took licensing away from courts, it gave it to local councils, and you just applied for the licensing hours that you wanted. And if nobody objected, those were the hours that you got. So it was a massive change. Now, you ask, was it a good thing? Well, change of any kind delivers new winners and new losers. So I think nightclubs had traditionally traded on the hours between 10:30, which is when pubs used to close, and 2 a.m., which is when clubs closed. That kind of demarcation of different types of premises was swept away by the new Licensing Act, and we saw the development of a bar scene. The consequences that had for nightclubs is it decimated their number. So those that started bars and city centre pubs were the new winners. Those that were running traditional nightclubs that relied on the old hours, they were the losers. So it depended on what side of that equation you sat.
Interesting, because now, and we'll come back because we're going to take a break very shortly, and we'll come back and say about the decimation of what's going on, and I know you have a very serious point on this. Before we do go to that, tell us about the book you wrote, which was the 2014, I think it was.
It was published in 2014. I've actually written two, but one of the better one of the two was the first one. It's called Culture Wars and Moral Panic, The Story of Alcohol in Society. And it really gives an historical account of the temperance movement. That was sort of very much religiously driven in the 19th century. Temperance originally meant moderate use of alcohol, but it quickly morphed into a desire to prohibit people from drinking it. So in America, that's the road they went down between 1920 and 1933. As you know, alcohol was prohibited, whereas in this country we went down the route of licensing it. So it really traced why that happened, and I think this kind of leads on to what you want to talk about later, which is kind of why government is sort of scapegoating the license trade in the current crisis. And I think it's because there is a deep cultural suspicion of alcohol and of the premises in which it's sold. Hold it there, because that's exactly where we're going. We'll take a break. It's Liverpool Live. I'm talking to Paul Chase, and believe me, what he has about to say now is fascinating. Liverpool Live. I'm talking to Paul Chase. It is Liverpool Live. It is Pete Price with him now. Listen to what Paul thinks about the licensing trade. You have a platform. Let's hear it, Paul. Okay. Well, where should we start? You want to talk about the current situation? The current situation and what you think is going to happen this year, because you have a theory that is really interesting, that we will never go back to the way we were ever. Yeah, I think that the COVID-19 pandemic has led to what I've heard others call an acceleration of the inevitable, that a lot of pre-existing trends will speed up. And I think that for a long time, the health lobby in particular has been very keen on reinstating controls for the license trade, reducing hours, reducing availability. And we've kind of gone back to the situation where we've had hours set nationally by the government. So when the trade reopens, I mean, the trade has been devastated, as you know, by the various lockdown policies that we've had. When it reopens, will we simply be going back to the situation as it was before last March, where city centres are full of a weekend and people have the hours that they've been granted on their licence? Or are we going to have a much more heavily restricted licence trade? I suspect it will be heavily restricted for some time to come. I think that we're going to see a control of hours. I think we're going to see a public health licensing objective and a lot more restraints placed upon hours of opening. I can see that in certain types of licensed premises, nightclubs, late night bars, premises where you've got people packed together, vertical drinking premises with door supervisors, I can see that the possibility of a health passport, some indication that you've had the jab, that you've been vaccinated, as a condition for gaining entry. So I think that public health is going to become the lever by which people in the public health movement who've long been very anti-alcohol and wants to turn the industry into a sunset industry, this is their chance to vindicate their long-held beliefs and their previously held narratives. So I think we're going to, sadly, I fear, we'll be moving into a situation which is far more heavily regulated and more restricted than it was before the pandemic struck. And what's really important to grasp here is that pubs and bars are part of a massive industry, the hospitality industry, which employs over 3 million people in this country. That's 10% of UK employment. And the supply chain is nearly another 500,000 jobs in that. And I think that it is possible, if we think about pubs and bars, that there will be 30% or so fewer of those when we reopen than there was before the pandemic struck. So an awful lot of businesses and an awful lot of jobs are going to go as a result of the restrictions that we've suffered. Whether you think those restrictions are justified or not, that they are having the effect of destroying viable businesses, and never more so than in the licensed trade. So I guess if I can sort of conclude my sort of soapbox rant here, Peter, I'd say my plea to government would be that when you do begin to lift the restrictions as the vaccination process unrolls, then do so in a way which enables the trade to reestablish itself profitably. Because even under Tier 2, about a third of licensed premises didn't bother reopening because the restrictions on service and people having to be seated and table service only have made it economically unviable for thousands and thousands of pubs to open. And it's not just all pounds and pence. Pubs and bars and nightclubs are part of the social fabric of this country. It's where you meet your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your future partner. It's where a lot of lonely people go, and it's often their only point of contact. And I think we would be losing something really precious if we see a massive closure of pubs in this country, because they're not getting the support that they need from government during this closed down period to ensure that they're able to reopen when finally we get through this crisis and return to something like normality.
Now, the small businesses are already going, small pubs are going. Will companies like Wetherspoons survive?
Companies like Wetherspoons will survive. Wetherspoons is a very well-run business. It has a very clear strategy. The pubs that are suffering the most are those that are in the rented sector, the leased pub sector. Yeah. But Jack and Vera running the Dog and Duck, renting it from a large pubco. There's a massive problem growing up there of unpaid rent, which is going to come on top when pubs reopen. They're going to have a massive millstone of debt around their neck. So I think a lot of keys will be thrown in the coming months. There are a lot of people at the moment who work in pubs who are being paid 80% of their wages under the furlough scheme for zombie businesses which will not reopen when the pandemic crisis comes to an end, because their owners or their tenants have simply been unable to sustain them in the meantime, that they've run out of cash. And if you look at the nightclub scene, which is obviously my background and yours, Deltic is the biggest nightclub owner in the country. They got over 52 sites. The wonderful chief executive, Peter Marks, a few weeks ago they went into receivership, and fortunately they found somebody, a venture capitalist company, that's bought them out of that, and they will reopen, but even they're going to lose about 10 of their sites. And that's the biggest nightclub chain in the country.
Yeah. Paul,
so we're just going to see a much reduced sector, I'm afraid.
Paul, what about the security staff? Because that also is big business, isn't it? What are they all doing now? I know some are looking after shops and stuff, but what are they doing?
Well, most door security staff are not employed directly by pubs or nightclubs. They're employed by door security companies. And I would suggest that if those companies haven't got like static sites of one kind or another that they can redeploy those people to, that they will be out of work at the moment. They won't be doing anything. Maybe they've been furloughed if they've been paid through the payroll, or maybe they've been able to claim money as self-employed door supervisors because they work for more than one door supervising company. But they are just one group of people who've been laid off work and who are, not middle class, not receiving 80% of a good salary. But, the average doorman's earning 50, 60 quid a night. Really, it's a minimum wage job. And if you're trying to survive on 80% of that, then good luck to you.
Paul, you make an awful lot of sense. To sum up and finish, what would you, or how do we finish a conversation like this? I don't know. How do we?
Well, I'll try and finish on a note of optimism. We recall, you and I, back in the 1990s when the high street was in trouble. And the joke was that every time a city centre bank closed, a trendy wine bar would open up. And it wasn't just a joke, it was true. And the licensed trade, in a sense, came to the rescue of the high street. It can do so again, but only if government makes the resources that are needed to nurse these businesses and keep them going, so that they're able to reopen and then trade under profitable terms without restrictions. Then we can lead the charge for resuscitating the high streets once this health crisis is over. But it needs that commitment from the government. So Rishi Sunak, if you're listening, get your checkbook out.